Hi everyone, my name is Camila. I'm the creator of Let's Talk Miami, and today we have a very special episode. Andres Corrales from the State of Miami Studios and I are having a joint episode where we're talking about where urban design and politics transect. Andres, I'm so happy to meet you and excited to have this conversation with you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, of course, of course. First of all, like I said, thank you so much for having me on your show and being willing to be on my show as well. My name is Andres Corrales. I am the founder of the State of Miami Studios, and I'm also an urban development consultant and new urbanist over here in Miami-Dade County. I created State of Miami Studios to increase awareness and to encourage involvement with the cultural shift that Miami-Dade County must endure to become a more sustainable place using the principles for the new urbanism. And that's why when I came across your page, I was like, wow, I definitely need to interview her because with Let's Talk Miami, with what you have going on, I really, really love it. And I see that more people are getting involved and having more of these political conversations. And it's exactly what we need to step up and to make steps and take steps forward to a more sustainable place, like I said. So, Camila, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you, the first question. What made you want to be so involved with Miami politics and to start Let's Talk Miami?
Yeah, well, I've always liked politics. I've always been that one weird person. But
Okay.
recently, in 2018, my family had a huge issue with the city of Miami. We took out a tree without a permit. And I always had the belief that politics has an ability to impact your day-to-day life more so than any other kind of realm, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really saw that hypothesis come to life. We got into a huge issue really for 9 months with the city just to try to resolve that. And
Okay.
and through those 9 months, I learned a lot about how our local government works, especially our city government. And there was a lot of things that I didn't know, and I was shocked that as residents weren't being educated on certain things. I would tell some of my friends of our experience, and they were like, "What? That I didn't even know that existed or that law existed." So I just saw a space where it wasn't being filled by our media, and we were just kind of living in ignorance. And then I
Okay.
just didn't want anyone to have to go through what my family went through. So I wanted to go out and inform people.
That's awesome. No, I definitely think that's a very noble thing to do. And at the end, I don't know if it's the media's responsibility to do that. And so I think it's more of like ours, right? It's for us to go like with the
Definitely.
internet, we have it. Yeah, we have it at the tip of our fingertips
No, I
on all
agree.
this information.
And that's why
Yeah.
I wanted to have you on the show because
Hmm.
I feel like new urbanism ties in perfectly with politics, but it's one of those topics where us as residents we really don't have that much information. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to like ask you what for you what is new urbanism and how does that impact Miami? So I wanted to just start the conversation with that.
New urbanism is a planning and development approach that was the basic way that everybody developed before the cars started dominating all of our development, especially here in Miami-Dade County, right? It's pretty much urban design that's focused on the human scale, right? So it's focusing on daily needs being met within a 5 minute walk, which is a quarter mile radius, right?
Mm.
And this is typically the best neighborhood unit because you should be able to walk and go to work or get a grab a bite to eat, like they say, or whatever it is, or whatever you need to do, whether it's a hospital or go to whatever it is, right? And because of the development patterns that took over after World War II, especially over here in Miami-Dade County, we need to drive for everything except if we live in like maybe like brick or something, and our lifestyle is centered around that. There's very few places in the entire county that you can live a carless lifestyle, right? Because of everything being so far away. So new urbanism is pretty much that, like that design approach, and it's tied into Miami and Miami-Dade County because actually the city of Miami's code, which is Miami 21, is a new urbanism code. It's a form-based code.
What is a form-based
Cool.
code for us non-urbanists?
A form-based code is pretty much a zoning code that focuses more on the form of the buildings and creates like a prescriptive, predictable way for communities to be developed. So instead of the typical, what it's called, a Euclidean code, which is like a code that separates uses instead of focuses on the built environment and the form of the actual streets and, like I said, the public realm, which is the space between the buildings.
So basically it's like, so before we used to have an area where it was like residential, then you have a, you know, it's commercial.
Exactly.
You definitely see in Miami, you have like the west, like Homestead, Kendall is like where people go live. And then here, the east side where it's downtown, is where people go work. So you have what you're talking about, that issue where you need car because you can't get from Kendall to
exactly. So many people's commute is like from one side of the county to the other, or from like the north to the south. And
so basically a form-based code is like undoing that.
Exactly. It's more about focusing on the actual streetscape and the relationship of the form of the building with the street, and creating instead of a highway, creating streets, right, for multimodal purposes, like for pedestrians, for micromobility users, which is like the scooters and the revels that you see, as well as transit. So that's a huge thing. Being able to create places that transit is at the top of the priority, as well as the pedestrian, as well as the car, is what form-based codes kind of help you do. Because when you just separate all the uses, you create something that you have to drive for every single thing that you need to do. And that affects our quality of life in so many ways, right?
Yeah, completely.
It makes you have to drive everywhere, where it takes away that opportunity for you to be a little bit more active just by walking down the block or whatever it is, and countless more other things. Like, it increases your cost of living because now you need a car, and it's a car dependent society. So I feel like a form-based code is like one of the ways that you could reform the zoning and code to move forward to a more pedestrian friendly like place. Pretty much it's focused on building a place instead of somewhere that you drive to.
Yeah, no. And I was interested when we were talking about new urbanism, about the history, because usually when you hear about these kind of new, I remember I told you, I was like, when you hear of these new trends in design or architecture, a lot of people brand things as like, oh, that's socialism. But when you were telling me about the history of it, it comes from a private development, this idea of form-based code. So I think it'd be interesting for listeners to understand what's the history of form-based code.
Well, the history, first of all, of new urbanism, like the quintessential place is actually here in Florida.
Yeah.
It's a city called Seaside. It's in Walton County. It's like up by the Panhandle. It was actually the first place that was completely a new urbanism place from like a greenfield development, which is like there was nothing there before. It was like a remote area. And then, some of the founders of the Congress for the New Urbanism back in the 80s, along with a developer named Robert Davis, they made that place happen without any zoning code, without any, because back then it was, like I said, it's in the 1980s, at a time when the local jurisdiction, Walton County, had no planning department. Wow. So it's like they made it happen based on what they had researched, and it wasn't something that was prescribed to them. They just did it. So it's not about increasing regulation, it's about increasing options, right? And like I said, it takes you from a car dependent, you have no option but to have a car and to have to drive everywhere, to giving you more options. Like, hey, I don't have to drive to let's say to the grocery store. I could ride my bike, or I can walk over there, or I could take the train or the bus or whatever it is. It's not about increasing regulations. Like I said, it's about increasing options and giving you a higher quality of life by not having to make you drive everywhere.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, as you say that, I'm thinking, wow, it's crazy. We consider like a lot of things like socialism, but when you really think about it, socialism is just like we're stuck with one option. It's like it's this or nothing. And what this is proposing, it's like, I'm not telling you don't drive. What I'm telling you is like, now you have an option. You can drive, you can bike, you can walk, you can take the bus. I mean,
definitely agreed.
That's agreed. A true free market. Really like paradise.
Yeah, and it's funny because when the word socialism is thrown out there, it's like to like try to discredit the common good, right? So that you're so much into politics, I wanted to ask you this question. So I'm gonna ask you, ready? Is it the role of government to promote individual rights while defending the common good, or to promote the common good while defending individual rights, right? And first of all, the reason I ask you this is because where we are and like our current conditions is because I feel like the people think that the government's role is to promote individual rights while defending the common good. When I think to really create communities that are good for everybody and not just for the few, I think it should be to promote the common good while defending individual rights. But I'm curious to know what you think.
Yeah, I think that the role of government should be promoting common good while defending individual rights. But the reason why I say that is because if you have a government that is governing for an individual, well, then that just leads to corruption. And I mean, we've seen it. We've seen that time and time again. You see it in like a government going for just the lobbyists. You see it in government just defending a politician, a government that's built around a persona. And I think we've seen it, especially the Hispanic community, the immigrants. We've seen it time and time again that when you put the interest of one person or a small interest group, or it could be a large interest group, but if it's just one person or one interest group, then you're completely leaving out the rest of the population that, mind you, is contributing to society as well. It's not like that one person is doing everything. So that's really why I believe that you should be governing for the common good, but definitely defending individual rights, because you can't say that law is going to affect everyone. I mean, you have to take into consideration exceptions, and that should be in our laws, and should be a culture really within our politicians and our government employees, that, you know, not everyone's the same, not everyone should be treated the same, not everyone comes from the same background, and those people should be considered and taken into consideration, but definitely not at the expense of everyone.
Agreed. Yeah, I feel like the common good is important, but so are individual rights, and we should never be stripped from our individual rights or anything like that, which is, I think it's like one side uses it as like a scare tactic to the other. Oh no, that's socialism. I disagree.
No, and I'm honestly a huge proponent of private property rights.
Same.
Like, I agree completely with our founders that said, if there's no incentive to having if there's no private property rights, there's really no incentive for you to take care of anything. And you see that with people that own their house versus people that just rent, short-term renters. You see communities that are mostly homeowners, like the Gables. Everyone wants to live in the Gables, but guess what? Most of the people that live there own their property there. While if you go to a place that's usually underdeveloped, it's usually predominantly renter-owned. And the reason is because there's no stake. People don't have a stake in that community, and so why take care of it? And it's not saying that everyone's like that, but it's just reality. You're thinking, well, I'm going to move. I'm not going to spend. And honestly, it's just economic common sense. Why would you spend on bettering a property that's not yours when you can save that to buy up your own, right? So if there's no private property rights, that's why I say we definitely need to defend individual rights.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ability to own your own property is a huge driver of wealth too, right?
It's the American dream.
Exactly. It literally is the American dream. I'm 100% in agreement and accordance. And that's how my family came over here from Nicaragua and made their American dream happen by getting that property, right? So.
Yeah. And question for you. So we're talking about this common good, but how does that look like for Miamians here, like in urban design? What does that look like?
Well, to me, it looks like mixed income communities. It looks like I told you, it looks like multimodal options, not just car dependence. It looks like projects and incremental development, not just huge developments like how you were talking about the special area, the SAPs, right? I feel like it has to be an inclusive development, and it's centered around transit. We have to find a way to keep our costs low for the local residents and the local population, and not just be a city that's attracting international and foreign investment, right? So I really think it's like a tale of two cities. And right now there's the people that live here are kind of getting lost in translation, right?
Completely. Yeah.
And we're not really a priority because they say, hey, no, you guys are getting jobs because of the tourism, and but there's so many things that we're not focusing on. Like I said, like how you mentioned, the affordability crisis. So many people over here cannot afford to even buy a property, or sometimes not even to rent, because they don't make enough for the cost of living, even though the cost of living here is cheaper than, let's say, New York City or Los Angeles or other main cities, or like San Francisco, right? I
Well,
definitely think. Go
you'd
ahead.
be surprised. In our last episode, we found out that we were the the seventh most expensive city in the world. So, I mean, it's
No,
pretty high cost of living here.
well, I mean, yeah, it's high, but when you compare it to other, like those other cities, it's not that high, and it's higher for locals, because of the wages that they're making compared to the rent. But yeah, that's what I think it looks like. The common good is more about promoting these affordable developments, but not only having them as like enclaves and like separated, but having them sprinkled into different communities, and to have them look like market rate housing, right? And it also looks like promoting these transportation projects and public transportation options that allow you to have a lower cost of living and not have to spend your entire money on car insurance and your
Gas.
mortgage or your rent. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what the new zoning code Miami 21 is trying to achieve, to make it more affordable. But do you want to talk a little bit more about Miami 21? What is it?
Sure. Well, Miami 21 is a step up from what we used to have, which was, well, in the city of Miami, which is a bunch
Right.
of different master plans, and they weren't really in accordance or in alignment, right? Now Miami 21 is a form-based code, like I said, and it's the entire city focused into that code. But I do think that there are some things missing from that code, like, less of a bureaucratic process to get, these building permits. There's a
Okay.
lot of room for improvement, but it was a good step up from what we had. And that's why I think I have a lot of hope that we'll eventually, get there, because form-based codes are such an impactful kind of zoning to do in places that can actually help the physical shape of these places. Like I said, as I told you, I'm an urban development consultant. So one of the services that I provide are feasibility studies for developers.
Mhm.
And when I create these feasibility studies to developers, one of the things that you have to take into consideration is the pre-development, like, time period. And these guys are always saying, hey, you thought it was 6 months, it's really going to be a year and 6 months, or maybe even 2 years to get the building permit. And they talk about how the process is so bureaucratic, and then they already turned off about that process. So I think
Yeah.
new urbanism is not to blame for that. It's more about the people managing, and like the bureaucratics that are so deep into that process that has been happening. I think new urbanism is actually like a positive thing that brings about the opportunity for a more sustainable development. And what there needs to be, like how we were talking about, there's probably going to be an update to Miami 21, because it was adopted in 2009. So it's been a little bit over a decade. And I think one of the first things that needs to be reformed is a fast track permitting technique, especially for to incentivize more market rate or affordable housing, and not just have these luxury properties that are built for people that are coming in from San Francisco or New York. So many people are moving here, or from like the international place.
And that's
Go ahead.
something that the whole Miami 21 and new urbanism takes into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
I read that the old code, it doesn't really give you an ability to develop for affordable housing, while this new code, you're able to create affordable housing, and not just in the sense of like, well, you have certain buildings that are like 10-story high for affordable housing, also known as Plan Ocho here in
Yeah.
county. But it's also like considering, okay, there's affordable housing in suburban areas. You can do that through duplexes or fourplexes. or smaller apartments. So that's definitely interesting.
No, definitely. And that's something that they call the missing middle,
Right.
right? Because the missing middle is the property types that are in between a single family home and like a high rise building. So like you said, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, or a small mid rise building. These are all product types that increase the supply of units and allow you to incentivize more affordable housing. And like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, obviously over here we call them efficiencies, right?
Yes,
But
yes,
in a lot of
definitely.
places, you can't have an efficiency. It's like illegal, or it's like a whole other process. But that right there is an opportunity for affordable housing, and then it also benefits the people who own the property, because then you might be getting your mortgage paid by somebody who's renting, the efficiency, right? Well, there's so
Right.
many ways to say it's like a accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat. In different places they're known as different things, but that's another way to combat the affordability crisis, by allowing these things to be permitted and not for it to be an issue. And like how you said, these, like 10-story buildings that are all dedicated specifically to, like you said, Plan Ocho or
Yeah.
Section 8, right?
Yeah.
Or to affordable housing. I don't, that's not the answer for me either. I think it's about sprinkling these kind of developments, maybe even within the same building, like they've done recently in downtown, but that inclusionary zoning thing, that they're allowing developers to build more density and have more units if they incorporate a certain amount or a certain percentage to affordable housing units.
Oh,
And
wow, I didn't know.
that's the thing. Yeah. I feel like it has to be sprinkled throughout the entire county. And it's not about having them in one single building and like
Right.
segregated them in a way. Yeah.
I remember listening during the campaign of District 3 with Keon Hardeman, and he was saying it's not fair that one district has to have the burden of affordable housing, which you see it's usually like in Liberty City or Brownsville. Usually that's where the bulk of the affordable housing is. But
Mm-hmm.
well, guess what? Like if you live in like if you work in Little Havana or downtown, like why not be near that area? Why not have that same access to affordable housing? Or why
Exactly.
does Brownsville have to just have the burden of it when they could also have their own development that incentivizes also economic growth? So I completely agree in that sense that it should be sprinkled, and in a sense it has been sprinkled, but how you mentioned, it's always been kind of suppressed by government. Like you can't have an efficiency, because here in Little Havana,
Yeah.
efficiencies are it's a common trait in most houses.
The ability to sprinkle this around different places creates like a balanced environment, and it doesn't, like I said, segregate them, or like single them out, or just make an area specifically bad. It's definitely about distributing these kinds of things throughout the entire county,
Right.
to make it the most sustainable.
Yeah, and I love when we were having our conversation, you were talking about sprawl. Like
Oh yeah.
I think when you explain sprawl, people will be like, yes, I know exactly what that means. So do you want to go ahead and talk about
No,
that?
yes, okay. I do want to touch on that. And the funny thing is that, like, being born and raised over here in Miami-Dade County, we don't really, I feel like we're in a bubble of sprawl, so we don't really realize it until we go somewhere else. So sprawl is pretty much the opposite of new urbanism. And
Yeah.
it's because sprawl is the car dominated, like landscapes and places that create, let's say, like a specific, like an office park, for example, right? An
Mhm.
office, a shopping center, something that's one single use, and that it's specifically that use, and that to get there you have to drive. Sprawl is also like these complexes of residential units that are like a gated community that's like very far off in the distance, that you have to drive to it, that there's nothing around there. So it's, like I said, it's the complete opposite of new urbanism and traditional neighborhood development, which is, the mix of uses, the mix of property types, the mix of everything, pretty much, is having a variety of things. Sprawl is the opposite, and it's just one single type of development that's far off in the distance that you need to drive at all times. So
That's like
there's
Doral or Kendall or West Kendall kind.
eggs 100%. Yeah, because we developed so much after World War II, a lot of our developments are just sprawl. Like,
so that's basically like you have that like gated community or like just housing complex, and then you have people having to like transit out to like their jobs,
yeah,
basically.
exactly. Sprawl is the complete opposite of a walkable place.
Yeah,
So
Miami-Dade
yeah,
County.
for unfortunately right now,
Yeah.
even though there are some bright spots, like I said, and there are some places that you could live a
Like
car-free
which ones?
lifestyle, I would say definitely along the Metro Rail corridor and the Metro Mover.
Okay.
If you live like around that radius, and let's say, for instance, let's say you live in South Miami and you work in downtown Miami, like that's just a metro, a few metro stations away, or in like the Wynwood area. If
Mm-hmm.
you live like in let's say Wynwood 25 and you work like in one of those co-working spaces that's like right around there, you might not have to, but it all depends on your lifestyle and like where you work, or
Right.
where do you go to
Yeah.
the gym and a bunch of these things.
And when
But
I was
it's
researching Miami 21, I
go
was
ahead.
seeing that Wynwood is actually a result of Miami 21.
I've actually just finished reading a chapter in a book called The New Pioneer, and it talks about the history of Wynwood, right?
Okay.
About how back in the day, Wynwood started off as like, like in the early 2000s, like before 2005. It was where the artists used to go illegally to live there and have their studios there, right? And it slowly grew into an urban place, and it grew through like lean urbanism and tactical urbanism, which is doing things that are not, let's say, 100% legal, right? Like I said, these people living in these warehouses where
Right? Because that
they were
wasn't
zoned.
that
Yeah,
based on the old code, that wasn't legal.
exactly. It was illegal to live there. Um, but that slowly that place started picking up, and developers started investing in it. Like the Goldman that
Mm-hmm.
developer, he created the Wynwood walls, and that created a place, and it created like the heart of Wynwood. And now Second Avenue is named after him, but he wasn't the one, even though he was one of the pioneers, like as far as like major developers. But my point is, Wynwood grew from a place that was like somewhere where artists illegally lived, and they were able to live there cheaply or affordably, right? And then people started noticing, hey, this is like the next place, and they started
Yeah,
investing more and more, and
and through Miami
property
21, it
values
became
rose.
legal to have living
Yes,
spaces.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which incentivized that development. Which brings us to that point where people are saying, well, this is all great, but a lot of people are going to argue and say, well, this kind of new urbanism has brought, and I mean, we're seeing it through Wynwood, gentrification. We're increasing our cost of living. People are saying what you're saying, that now we have more ordinances, more regulations, we have more inspectors, you're increasing our fees, which are being passed along to homeowners or renters. And so what do you say to that?
What I say is that the actual bureaucratic process and the fees and all of that is separate from new urbanism, because it's not like new urbanism is saying, hey, we want more regulation, we want more fees, we want more of this. It's not them, right? New urbanism is more inclusive and sustainable, and when it comes to social issues and environmental issues and economic issues, right? It's just the most sustainable. But I do feel like there has to be some kind of reform, like I told you, of
Yeah.
the zoning code that enables these like neighborhood developments or infill developments, and expedites them. So and by doing so, incentivizes them. So if imagine if it was super hard to build these luxury high rises, and it was extremely easy to build these buildings that are mixed income, or along those lines, like the sustainable products that we need to address sea level rise, the affordability crisis, and the wealth gap, all of these things. I think that would be a driver for more of these kinds of projects, instead of more of the same, and increasing the inequality gap and all of these things. So yeah, I'm definitely defending new urbanism when people say, hey, it might be new urbanism's fault, and it's definitely not. I think it's more about the bureaucrats
It's the
in
politics behind it.
yeah, the politics behind it, exactly. So then
Is there a
let
way for it, like, because I know that they're doing that reform now, and
Mm-hmm.
it's I'm glad that they're doing it because, as we're mentioning, there are faults in Miami 21. There are
Mm-hmm.
issues that I guess were accidental issues, but we're facing them, and we need to address them. And just to clarify, Miami 21 has always been a form of making transit like necessary. It has never
Okay.
taken out transit, so that is really something that I am okay with. But for example, you have areas like the Grove or the Roads that they have a certain architecture, a certain form, and I'm kind of shocked now that I know all of this through our conversation that we
Mm-hmm.
have this code that is saying, all right, we're going to be building based on making buildings just fit in with the neighborhood. We're not making it by use. But then you have in the Grove and in the Roads, you have like these shoe boxes. We call them shoe boxes. These white modern boxes, houses, and usually they're duplexes. And they just don't fit in with the neighborhood. You have like this century-old house next to this brand new modern house. Like so what's going on? What's causing that if we have this Miami 21? Like, should that be happening?
That's like a tricky thing, right? Because at the end of the day, the architecture is up to whoever, the group that's coming in.
Right.
The form is what's prescribed, as in like this is where you have to build your building up to. This is the line, and
Oh,
the
okay, I see.
context of the building. When it comes to the architecture, it's new urbanism doesn't propose like, hey, classical architecture is number one or modern
Okay.
architecture is number one. It's more about, like I said, the form of the building. And I know what you're talking about. Some projects do seem out of context,
Yeah.
and that kind of in a way hurts the character of the neighborhood. But I feel that at the end of the day, the form-based code allows or incentivizes and prescribes these buildings to be in a way that they create this public realm, and the space between the buildings is the most important part. And the architecture of it is really up to the groups.
Got
So
it.
they can't really tell you, hey, you have
It's
to
their
make it this
individual
way.
right.
Exactly. It's the
Okay.
individual, right?
Got it. Got it.
But so let me segue to this question. What do you think is Miami's most critical political issue right now, right? Now that we're talking about housing, we kind of mentioned sea level rise a little bit, and the wealth gap, affordability, a bunch of these things. We talked about the bureaucratic, issues in the permitting process and all of this. What do you think is the most critical issue of them all when it comes to the politics of Miami?
Honestly, I think it's corruption. The corruption here, I mean, we can talk about making things affordable, making Miami transitable, but if the money that's being allocated for these issues are being robbed, I mean, we're wasting our time. We need to be holding our politicians accountable that they're 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 taking care of this money and using it for what they're supposed to be used. We have honestly one of my biggest and in the city of Miami, people know me as the tree girl, but it's just because, yeah, we had to deal with that tree for 9 months.
I remember
I
you
was
telling the story.
there, I was in City Hall, I was in the public building in downtown. And it's just so, like, it's just so obvious the corruption that we have. And it's like, we were asked for $24,000 for a tree trust fund that's supposed to be planting trees all throughout like the city of Miami. And honestly, I hadn't seen any new trees in our neighborhood or in the city for like the past decade. And that tree trust fund had been imposed, I think, 2006. And I'm like, where is this money going to? And when we
Yeah.
went and looked at what this money was being used for, we saw $100 being used for Crayolas, 6 Crayolas,
Mm.
like $500 being used for a gallon of a plant, which in Home Depot costs $40. I mean, it's like we're asking developers, we're asking residents, or we're just imposing fees and fines and taxes for eggies. Like everyone knows about the half penny tax
Yeah.
on
The false
transportation,
promise. Yeah.
and we're still waiting for metro. Like, and we've been paying. So when people say, well, we can't go back, I take it personal because fine, we can't go back, but I've been paying. My parents have been paying.
Yeah.
We've all been paying.
We've all been paying.
No es suficiente. Like, it's not enough to say,
Yeah.
bueno, it is what it is. No, it's not. It is what it is, because then I want my money back, you know?
No, it's true. And, you know, that brings me into this point that I wanted to make. All these issues that you're talking about, like the corruption is a huge thing, right? But
Yeah.
sea level rise and affordability and the lack of transit and, you know, car dependence, these are all going to become more urgent priorities as, you know, as the next few decades come. And, you know, that's like the prime of our lives, of our generation's lives, and the next one. So that's why I feel like it's on us, right, to have these conversations and to pretty much have it at the forefront of you know, people's minds that, hey, we have the power to hold these people accountable, and it's on us to be involved.
Completely.
That's why I commend you. That's why I commend you for doing Let's Talk Miami, and that's why I appreciate it so much. And I'm so glad that you had me on and that you were able to come over here on State of Miami, because this is what we need to do, and we need to do more of it. More people need to have these conversations, understand how all of these issues affect their quality of life.
Yeah,
right?
completely.
And to realize that it's you, if you tolerate it and just say, it's whatever, it's okay, like how you said, it already happened, then you're just folding and you're not going to be part of the solution. We need you know, more awareness, and we need more involvement, because there has to be a cultural shift, and we have to be the generation that pushes it and holds these officials accountable.
Completely agree.
This is awesome. Thank you so much, like I said again, for being on the podcast and for allowing me to be on yours. And I hope we can all keep, let's keep the conversation going. We can do it via social media. Follow us. Follow me on State of Miami Studios, and follow Camila at Miami Talks Politics for her Let's Talk Miami podcast. And let's just keep doing more of this. Let's continue this conversation. And like I said, and
thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate, Andres, for your time, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.